Multi-rate ledger interest. In advanced interest method, you may specify multiple interest rates called staggering rates for different block of period. For example, 12% per annum for April to June, and then 15% per annum for July onwards, etc. You may further specify to round up the interest amount, for example, to nearest rupees, nearest 10 rupee, etc. Multi-rate interest activation. To set advanced, that is multi-rate interest computation method at F11 features accounting features, having set yes at activate interest calculation, further set yes at use advanced parameters to get advanced, that is multi-period multi-rate ledger interest parameters entry screen. At calculate interest transaction by transaction, set no. Multi-rate interest parameters setup. Now set the multi-rate interest parameters as follows. Interest rates. At rate, enter the rate and select the rate period at par field in the same way as described earlier for single rate interest rate. Balance type. At the field on, select the balance type as follows. All balances. Select it to take both debit and credit balances into account for computation of interest. Credit balances only. Select it to take credit balances only into account for computation of interest. Debit balances only. Select it to take debit balances only into account for computation of interest. Interest period. Enter the start and end date of the period for which interest the rate would be applicable at applicable field. At from field, enter the start date of the period from which the specified interest would be applicable. At to field, enter the end date of the period for which the specified interest rate would be applicable. Rounding method. At rounding, select the rounding method from the list and specify the rounding limit as follows. No rounding. Select not applicable if no rounding is applicable. The computed interest is auto rounded to nearest paise, equivalent to normal rounding to 0.01 limit as explained next. Lower rounding. Select downward rounding to round up amount to lower value. The rounded amount is lower than or equal to the computed amount. Higher rounding. Select upward rounding to round up the amount to higher value. The rounded amount is higher than or equal to the computed amount. Normal rounding. Select normal rounding to round up to the nearest value. The rounded amount may be higher or lower than the computed amount as per rounding limit set. Rounding limit. In any of the three rounding methods, at limit specify the rounding limit, that is 0.01, 0.10, 1 rupee, 10 rupee, etc. You may set different rates for debit and credit balances. This way you may specify multiple rates for different periods. Their periods must not overlap, or you may have separate parameters for debit and credit balances. Press enter at next blank rate field to terminate the interest parameter entry for the ledger account. Type Y to save the ledger entry. While entering multiple rates, ensure that the period for each period is distinct and continuous. Staggering. The period should never be overlapping nor gapped.